Okay, we have this graphic organizer that every mastery path has, and it's about cell transport. And cell transport is just what it says. There's something here, and the cell moves it over there, just like transportation. So that's what the title and the topic of the cell transport is. Now you'll notice over here it says free, and for a cell, free means no energy. And then cost on the other side of the graphic organizer means energy. So, and I've color coded mine because that's how my brain works. So what I've done, passive transport, passive, you just kind of sit there and things will happen naturally. So to me, blue is very chill and just let things happen. So passive transport takes no energy, and everything goes from high to low. For example, if I was on a pair of rollerblades at the top of this hill, it wouldn't take any energy. I could just stand there, and I would naturally move from a high location down to a low location. And then on the other side of the graphic organizer, we have active transport. And I used red because it reminds me of energy. And so active transport is just that. It's active. The cell has to do something to make it happen, to make the materials move. It has to apply energy. So we're going to focus on the passive transport side. And the first one we're going to talk about is diffusion. And diffusion is the movement of small particles through a cell membrane from an area of a high concentration to low concentration. You can think of this every time you take in a breath, what's happening in your body is diffusion. So you're breathing in oxygen, it goes to your lungs, your blood, your circulatory system, you have veins and capillaries in your lungs, picks up the oxygen. So now the blood leaving the lungs is high concentration of oxygen. Then it delivers it to cells, and there's cells that have used up the oxygen, and now they are low oxygen. So the oxygen diffuses, moves from the high concentration of oxygen in the blood to the low concentration of oxygen inside the cell. Now the cell has CO2 it needs to get rid of, so the cell has a high concentration of CO2, the blood has low. So then it moves from the cell into the blood. And the cell really doesn't have to apply any energy at all. It happens naturally because things in nature seek balance. So if it's high, it will move to a lower area. So diffusion is of small particles, salt, glucose. Now, another kind of passive transport is osmosis, and that's water. And it can be pure water, and in experiments you'll see that. But water inside your body is usually holding things, so it has solutes. And there are 3 types of osmosis. There is hypertonic, just like a person who is hyper is overactive and out there. Same with hypertonic. The solute outside of the cell is higher than what's inside the cell. And remember, if the solute's higher, that means it has a lower amount of water. And if the solute is lower inside, that means it has a higher amount of water. Okay, so hypertonic, it's higher on the outside. The solute is higher on the outside. And so if we have over, we have to have under. So hypotonic is where the solute outside is lower than what's inside. And if you think of hypo, we talked about derma and epidermis and dermal as skin. A hypodermic, since everyone's talking about vaccines, a hypodermic goes under your skin. Okay? So we have over with hyper, we have under with hypo, and then where nature wants to go and to seek its balance, we have equal. So isotonic. The solute inside equals the solute outside. So there really won't be any movement because it's balanced. There is no high or low. And if you think of it, if in math, isosceles triangle means every side is the same length, every angle is the same measurement. So iso means equal. So we're moving small particles from high to low. We have water that's moving from high to low, no energy. So what else is there? The last type of passive transport is facilitated diffusion. Facilitated means helped. So like if there's an old lady standing on the street corner and you help her cross the street, you were a facilitator. And so if you have a facilitator in cells, that's going to be a protein. And it always looks kind of like this big chunky. If there's a graphic, you'll have like this big blob circular thing. And that's going to be the protein. And sometimes you'll see a tunnel through it. So sometimes the outer layer, and we learned that the cell membrane is a phospholipid double layer. And lipids sometimes don't play nice with other molecules. And so there may be things the cell needs, but because of the charge or some other reason, it can't go through, or large particles, it cannot go through the phospholipid bilayer. So proteins are there to help. So the phospholipid layer is going, no, and the proteins layer is going, hey, come on over here. You can get through us. And so it offers, it's still high to low. It's not pushing it. It just gives it safe passage. So the larger molecule can pass through, or something that has a different charge or ion than the outer layer of the cell membrane. So all three of those, diffusion, osmosis, and facilitated diffusion, require no energy. Okay, so now active transport. This is where we have the cost to the cell, because the cell has to use its resources to make the energy. So you can think of cost that way. So if you're going to move something in a cell, you can move it out of a cell, which is exocytosis. And any word we've been seeing cyto a lot, cytokinesis, for example. Cyto means cell. So anytime you see cyto, that big long word that it's in has to do with cells. Something is being done to cells. So exocytosis, you could think of exiting the cell. Now, when would this happen? The easiest example to think of is fish in salt water. Salt is not good for our cells. So here is the fish. It's surrounded by salt water, which is a high concentration area. So naturally in nature, the salt in that water will want to move inside of the cells of the fish. And the fish's cells are like, time out, dude, can't happen. So it has to use its energy to push any salt out of its cell. So that's exocytosis. It's exiting, it's pushing out. Like an exoskeleton insects have. Their skeleton is on the outside. So cells can move things out. What naturally is the other choice? Cells can move things in. Endocytosis. And that's where the cell can actually engulf a substance and bring it in. Okay? So there's two things, and if you look at the substances the cell is engulfing and bringing it in, it kind of makes sense. That one type is phagocytosis. Notice cyto, cyto, cyto. It's all talking about what the cell is doing. So phagocytosis, it's eating the solids. Okay? Like a white blood cell going out and engulfing a bacteria, so to help stop infection. So if you're eating solids, the opposite that cells can do is penocytosis, which is liquids. So that is the graphic organizer that every mastery path has. in your PowerPoint for bundle 3 of cells. Please use this to fill out. They like using cell transport in EOCs because it explains the movement, how cells get their materials, how cells get rid of waste products. And it also has, with facilitated diffusion, it has that protein. And so proteins, if you haven't realized by now, are kind of a big deal in biology. So they like using that. So the way to tell these two apart, there'll be something, if it's active transport in a graphic, there'll be something saying ATP, either like one of those comic strip, like explosion things with ATP in it, or old school, you always represent in physics, waves are energy. So they may have a wavy line and say energy above it, or they may have a wavy line and say ATP. So if you see ATP or energy, you know you're in the red and it's active transport. If there isn't any, then you know you're in the blue and you're chilling and it's passive and things will go from high to low. In active transport, it's the opposite. You have to force and use energy to go from low to high. To end, I'll go back to myself on rollerblades. Passive transport, I could just stand there and roll down the hill. If I stood on the bottom of that hill in rollerblades, that's where I would stay. I would have to exert a large amount of energy to be able to rollerblade up a hill. Okay, so cell transport is moving things in and out of a cell. Takes energy, passive. Back up. Takes energy, it's active. Does not take energy, it's passive. Okay, hope this helps you fill out your graphic organizer.